I'm Kev. Today is July 1st, 2020, and I haven't had a drink in 1 year. This is a story about my journey to this date, to this spot, to this moment of my existence. This is not a story about all of the times I fucked up while drinking, even though it is, and even though it is a story about all of the times I fucked up trying to quit. This is not a story about going to meetings and doing 12 steps work. I tried a few meetings and it wasn't for me. We'll get to that a little bit later. This is not a story about the pandemic of 2020, so let me get that out of the way right away. If someone had warned me that there was going to be a pandemic during the third and fourth quarters of my first year without alcohol that would cost me my day job in corporate hospitality and my night job as a story-slinging, pretend-playing theater fag, and that would cause a painful dread to simmer for months on end, maybe I wouldn't have quit drinking. That's a joke. This is not a story about a pandemic making it harder to stay on the wagon. The subtitle of the monologue you're watching is a conjecture. Normally, if you're reading a play, it will be like Romeo and Juliet, subtitle, a tragedy. A Raisin in the Sun, subtitle, a play. Angels in America, subtitle, a gay fantasia on national themes. SpongeBob SquarePants, the musical, subtitle, a gay fantasia on national themes. And I tend to make my subtitles little things to make my plays stick out. Subtitles of mine include a nasty little game of telephone, or a game of Monopoly, or a disco remix, or a meet and greet. The subtitles of my play are just for me. They're a little game I play as I create. I normally don't talk about the subtitles of my plays and the play itself or aloud in life, but it felt appropriate because the subtitle of the play you're watching is a conjecture. And what is a conjecture? A conjecture is a statement of fact based on incomplete information. Incomplete information. I said moments ago what this story isn't going to be. Meanwhile, it isn't even a full story. My story isn't over yet as it relates to alcohol and my alcohol abuse and addiction, and it won't be over until I'm dead. And like everything in life as a faggot, everything we grapple with won't have a final answer until we're dead. This is a story about my first year without alcohol, performances I've been in, work I've done, work I've not done because it's still too raw. This is a story about my family and my friends and myself and my queerness. And someone asked me the other night, well, why are you telling this story? I don't always have an answer for that one. When I'm telling my stories and making my work, I typically say, well, it's because it came into my head and out of my heart and onto the page. And the stories I put out into the world are stories I'm confident are mine to tell, and this one certainly is. It is my story to tell. And it's not a cautionary tale or an apology tour or a pity party. It's a celebration. It's a celebration of something I haven't quite finished defining yet. I believe that it is okay to want to celebrate what we don't quite fully understand. That's a statement loaded with, what about thises and what about that's, but I believe in certain cases, like reaching the end of your first year without ruining friendships or burning bridges or entirely fucking up your life. I believe that in cases like this, it's okay to celebrate, even though fucking up is just a first sit back of beer away. And I was thinking about all of that the other night on a walk. When I'm in the middle of writing these monologues, I tend to go on walks in the dead of night, because the dead of night is the only time you can walk around in full conversation, gestures, and cracking jokes and walking back statements and having arguments with yourself without the risk that anyone at all, if you see anyone at all, might bat an eye. And I was walking along the East River around 2 a.m. the other night, and I was taken back to 4th grade with my teacher, Mrs. Sparandara. And I thought about how in grade school on Long Island, every time we started a new chapter in our social studies textbook, Long Island Story, we would make a KWL chart. This was a chart that had 3 columns. What we already knew about the topic. Long Island is shaped like a fish. Long Island is known for its wineries on its east end. Long Island was indigenous land taken over by the Dutch, and the textbook pretty much ignores that, dumbs down the violence like we wouldn't learn it later anyway. The second column was what we wanted to learn about the topic. Is it really shaped like a fish? And if it is shaped like a fish, what fish specifically? Why did the owner of a prominent vineyard on Long Island's East End ghost me after a month of dates? And why is everyone on Long Island so unwilling to have uncomfortable conversations, especially if the outcome of the conversation is going to be a better future for all of us? And the third column was left blank. It was left blank because it was to be filled in later. because the third column was what we learned. With Mrs. Sparandara, we almost never filled it in because we were always behind, because one day early on, Brian Hall closed a metal door on his finger and almost severed it, and that one day of panic just set us back for the rest of the year. And that brings me to conjecture, because conjecture is the first two columns of the chart. Conjecture is an incomplete lesson. Conjecture is never getting the answers. And like I've said, I have the answers about all of this in a grand way until people are, and I've said I'll never have the answers about all of this in a grand way, and until people are memorializing me at my wake. And even then I might not have the answers, I might just be decomposing. But what I do have the answers about are what the last year has been like for me. I do want to make it very clear here that I am talking about my experience. I don't want to spoil anything for later in the play, but something that I've learned in this chapter of my Washington Heights story is that everyone's experience quitting drinking differs vastly and is deeply personal, and everyone uses everyone as a sounding board to justify and define how they're doing in comparison to others who also quit drinking. And it's like navigating a minefield sometimes, because everyone, I feel, defines everything differently. So I have to make it clear that, again, this is my story, and my story only insofar as it relates to what it felt like to be puppeteered by liquor and wine for so long, what it felt like to carry around the weight of 1,000 empty liquor bottles, what it felt like to be ashamed about things you said to strangers the night before. I have the K and the W for my life so far, and I will never have the L. It's not realistic that I'll ever have that full L for my full life, because our perspective on all of this shit is constantly changing. People change constantly. Even Leonard Cohen found God. I have the K and the W for life up to this point, and I have the L for this chapter, and I'd like to share that with you. What I know about my relationship with drinking, what I want to know about my relationship with drinking, and what I learned about my relationship with drinking after we broke up. And boy, oh boy, was it a rough breakup. And I guess there's no better place to start but the end. This is a Mary's Mixology. May and June of last year were the roughest of my life. The roughest months, the roughest nights, the roughest shifts at work. And there's still a lot of shame I'm working through, shame about things I remember, and I'm sure there are things I would be ashamed of if I were able to remember them, and I don't really want to go into too much detail about these things, but I guess that's kind of the point of talking to you about all of this, right? About all of this. It's to get it out in the open, not so much in a way where it's just to get the weight of it off my back, off my chest, but with an aim towards maybe helping someone who's watching, I don't know. Maybe helping someone realize they're not alone, but with the goal of telling the community in which I feel I sometimes drown that this is what the culture we proliferate does to even the strongest willed of us. This is what we do to each other. It's to get it out in the open. And I guess before I go to the end, I should jump back to the beginning and go back to the stuff in the middle later. Look, I've had a lot of shit happen to me in my life. Present circumstances aside, there was a lot of trauma when I was a kid. Two particular long-form improvisational traumas were to survive in order to get by. You had to turn oh-nos into yes-ands. There was a stretch of about 10 years where someone in my family died every year, and I went to an all-boys Catholic high school. I always say this play isn't about that, isn't about those things at its core, but at its core the play really is about that, because these things shaped the way I view the world, right? They imbued in me not only my outlook, but also the way I make my plays, a soaring optimism that can at a moment's notice be dragged back to earth by a moment of cynical recognition of rose-colored glasses in the mirror or in the selfie cam. The first time I ever had a drink, a real drink, one that my dad hadn't poured for me at the dinner table or offered to me by a server on vacation in Rome where intake could be monitored, I was a freshman in college in upstate New York. I wanted to seem like I was cool, so I asked the sophomore or junior or whatever she was at this college party during orientation, I asked her if she had anything stronger than the PBR that was being offered. And at first she said no, but later on, once the party died down, she offered me, she snuck me since no one else was going to be getting one. She offered me a shot of vodka with Dr. Pepper to chase, and we were in her room in her upperclassmen housing in the northeast end of campus, and I did the shot, and I tried to play it cool like I'd done it before, but my face gave it away. And she said, "You've never done a shot, have you?" And I admitted the truth. No, I haven't done a shot before, but I loved it. And over the next 4 years, shots and complicated, mostly liquor concoctions would become quickly what I did best at parties. If it had as many ingredients as a Long Island iced tea, it was going in me. But don't you ever insinuate that I would ever drink the trash that is the Long Island iced tea. On Fun Day, this was a free-for-all of a day drinking event on the college green called Fun Day. On Fun Day, sophomore year, I famously drank an entire bottle of Skinny Girl margarita and an entire handle of Southern Comfort and barely lived to tell the tale. You know, these were the the types of behaviors you could get away with in college. Kids being kids, college kids being college kids. But behaviors and patterns we learn in college are often things we have to fight to forget when we're out in the real world as we grapple with adjusting from the reality of becoming an adult in society to the reality of actually being one. Drunk fights with drunk friends and boyfriends in public don't really fly in the real world. Drunk jokes pushed to their limits with friends in dorms don't really work in the real world. Drunk stumble homes from the town bus to the bed don't happen in the real world. They don't work when your dad's car is parked at the train station lot and you have to drive home drunk, or when you're so drunk you can barely navigate your way uptown on the A train. The behaviors I was taught are okay in college were further ingrained in me by the theater community. Constantly drinking after shows and at opening nights, and at parties in Brooklyn I felt lucky to be invited to by older actors I had crushes on. Gotta show them, gotta show them I'm an adult, gotta show them I can hold my liquor with the best of them, gotta show them I can down an entire bottle of wine in 20 minutes. I embarrassed myself a lot those first few years out of college. I fell one night on the way to Penn Station heading home to Long Island and bashed my head open so badly I had to get stitches the next morning. And even now, or even a few days ago when I was typing out this story, which I'm not really going to get into too much in this, typing out that story, this little 2-line story, when I finished typing it out, my heart was beating so hard that I had to step away from writing this for about an hour to collect myself, to remind myself how far I've come since that night, how far I am away from being that person anymore, how there's nothing I can do to change the past, how I'll never get rid of the scar above my left eyebrow that reminds me of that night. Over those first few years of college, I was a mess. Over those first few years out of college, I was a mess in a job at a theater company downtown where we were always drinking beer at 5, or pulling out our desk whiskey when happy hour hit Friday afternoons, or on Monday nights before going to see drag shows with friends, killing time at the office, eating my dinner at my desk, watching YouTube, having a drink. I was a mess, working in a psychologically and financially and emotionally abusive job for a psychologically and financially and emotionally abusive boss. My view of the way things were supposed to work became incredibly skewed. As I drank to cope with the skewed view to find comfort in the fuzzy way things looked while I was there, whether it was in the basement of the Ace Hotel, which I regret to announce was my main haunt for a while, or if it was at any of the theater events with open bars and drunk friends, or if it was at some friend's party where I got too drunk and had to crash. As I found comfort in the fuzzy way things looked and felt there wrapped in a blanket of liquor, I began to go there more and more often, tried to live there as much as I could. I didn't start off, nor did I ever recognize it in the moment in that 5 o'clock rolls around time for an IPA moment, as escaping from an abusive job by drinking the beer they kept in the office fridge, nor did I begin the descent to the depths of my drinking because I had to stay alive. My drinking problem began because it was fun, and it was free, and it allowed me to not think about when my next paycheck would come, and it allowed me to not think about how the hell I was going to pay for my train ticket next week without that paycheck, or about how the hell I was going to move out of my parents' house and into the city, or about how I would pay the bill my doctor or my dentist had sent me. I guess without realizing it then and thinking about it now, I was drinking to escape, and then I slowly lost control of my ability to navigate that hazy world I went to nightly. And it all led up to last May and June. That's how I qualify it in my head. I say it was 4 final benders over those last 2 months, but in reality it was probably those last 6 months that were the real dark shit, right? Downing at least a bottle of wine a night, downing at least a handle of whiskey a week. And I want to say the downward curve towards my climbing aboard the wagon began with a show I was in last February. And again, I feel like I keep having to define this, so much of this, but I take the blame for all of this behavior. It's all me alone. But we would go out every night after the show, and every night after the show we would drink to excess, and I had the tolerance of an ox when it came to beer. And after a lot of money spent, and a lot of beer drank, and a lot of fries eaten, I'd stumble to the subway and make my way uptown, and pass out after a glass of wine before waking up at 8:45 the next morning for my day job to start the cycle all over again. Hungover, skulk into my day job, pounding coffee, pounding Gatorade, pounding water back. It was the beginning of the end, really. And at our closing night party, we stayed out until 8 a.m. And I told myself during all of that I had to go out for drinks every night after the show, because I was making connections, I was networking. It was a necessary expenditure. It was how I made the hangovers the next morning hurt a little less, and this is what I call the first bender. Last May, I was workshopping a play of mine, another solo show of mine. This one was about my mom. The first half of the play is a word-for-word transcription and performance of a notebook she kept to record the funny things my sister and I said as we discovered our vocabulary and the power it held in describing the world around us. About halfway through the notebook, it also tracks her diagnosis and decline from the breast cancer that would ultimately kill her when I was 7. The last few pages of the notebook are in my dad's handwriting. And the second half of the performance was a series of songs considering what it means to not really be able to remember anything about that period of my life because I was so little, and what it means to have had that memory, my memory of that time constructed by those around me. The play is and was nearly impossible to perform because of how emotional it makes me. And my director at the time did his best with my resistance to remove myself from the play, by which I mean at some point I did have to rehearse the damn thing and get through a run of it without breaking down or saying I can't do it, but rehearsing the thing was a fucking bitch, unbelievably emotionally destructive. And it was during this rehearsal period that I started drinking to decompress at night, which was when I clocked it. I said, oh, maybe this is something I should stop doing. Because in the past, I had tried to quit drinking plenty of times, tried to quit because I was tired of the hangovers or tired of how much I was spending, but when I started really drinking to recover from how difficult making this play was, that was when I started to try to talk myself out of drinking for good. Started the process, but as you might imagine, quitting drinking in a serious way is incredibly, incredibly fucking difficult. And it was for me. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but we're not there yet. We have a few more fuck-ups to get through before we get to the breakthrough. I clocked it. I said, oh, maybe, I should stop drinking to decompress at night. And then the day of our tech rehearsal for this workshop, the tech was going to be at 11 o'clock or something at night, and it wasn't ideal. I don't remember what exact time it was, but it was a later in the evening tech rehearsal, and it was the way things panned out with scheduling in this space, and that same day was one of my best friend's engagement parties at a Lush restaurant, this famous restaurant downtown, and there was an open bar and an endless amount of hamachi sushi and a lot of my crazy college friends who could knock him back with the best of them, and there was a lot of drinking that day. And I thought, by the time it's time for rehearsal, I'll be good to go. I'll get a Volvic from Dwayne Reed and a couple of dollar slices of pizza, and I'll be good to go. There was a lot of drinking, and in retrospect, a lot of regret about the way I drank that day, how much I drank, things I said while I was drunk to friends. I didn't black out, but there was a point walking to another bar nearby where, again, I clocked it. I said to myself, I'm losing control of my drinking. I am out of control. I am going to have another drink. Another drink I do not want to have. I'm going to have one more beer. Because it's the fun thing to do. Coming to this bar with my college friends was my idea. One more drink before we go home for the night, I said. And they all said, okay. And I told myself it was okay to have all of these drinks because it was a celebration of our friend and her love and her engagement. And anyway, the rehearsal that night did not go as planned. I could barely hold myself together, slurring my words, unable to hit the notes, and the director and the composer sent me home. Another wake-up call where I could see the problem and didn't know what to do. I didn't sleep a wink that night, and the reading the next day did not go well. Performances fueled by shame and guilt are unbelievably physically painful to give, and I hope I never have to work that way, feeling that way again. It went well on the surface in that it was a performance of the play and most of the notes, but the three of us who'd made the reading knew that it wasn't the work we'd spent the last month on. It wasn't the play I'd written. And after the little talk back we had, I gave the director a long hug and I cried and I said, I'm sorry, and he said, I know. And it wasn't the type of I know where he accepted my apology, and he shouldn't have accepted my apology. And I went home that afternoon and poured myself a glass of whiskey and brought my bottle into my room, and I nursed it until I woke up the next morning. I call this the second bender of the final four. I don't have much to say about the third bender, but it's a problem when your favorite bouncer at your favorite bar, in my case, I've talked about this many times in many of my plays, my favorite bar in the world is 9th Avenue Saloon at 46th and 9th. And something is up when your favorite bouncer at your favorite bar is concerned because you closed the bar down 7 nights in a row. And asks if you need help, asks if you might need help with your drinking. Insulted, I say no. Insulted, I say no. In my head, I decide I'm not going to go there anymore after that night, and I stayed that night till closing anyway, drinking all the cheap beer. Throwing my money down the drain, but justifying it with, it's Pride Month. I can spend my money on beer if I want to, just so long as I make rent. Spoiler alert, I did not make rent that month. And I did not go back to 9th Avenue Saloon after that night until the fourth bender, the final bender, Avatar, the last Kev bender, which began just a few nights later. The last bender was Pride Weekend last year, and I don't know if you remember, but Pride Weekend last year I was performing the previous iteration in this cycle of monologues I've written, where I was frustrated about the way my body felt and the way my body looked. And maybe I was frustrated about the way my body felt and the way my body looked because I was poisoning myself every night and shoving terrible food down my throat when I got hungry because I was a drunk toddler thrashing up 8th Avenue after the drag show or after dancing with friends. Or getting a drink alone and sitting at the gay bar writing notes in my journal, guys hitting on me, asking what I'm writing, why I'm there alone, can they buy me? No, I'm good. I'm good. I can handle myself. I can get my own drinks. And after last year's monologue, I went to my aunt's birthday dinner with my friend who had come to see the show. She tagged along with me to dinner, and we split a crab cake, and then my cousins and my friend and I went to 9th Avenue Saloon. And I got too drunk, and I quickly had to leave, and this friend came back with me to the theater to get my things with me, which I didn't want to bring to dinner. And somewhere in there, we got in a fight, or my drunk brain thought it was a good idea to say some shitty things to this friend, and I still don't know what those things are, or what I said to her that night. It's not a conversation I've been able to will myself to want to have. I'm not quite there yet, and I don't know when I will be. And I'm not making an excuse here. Like Eureka says, like Eureka O'Hara says on We're Here on HBO, this isn't about making excuses. This is about taking responsibility. But until last year, I was a theater artist who drank while he performed. Not because I had to get over my nerves, but because I felt it made it more communal. Me telling you a story, you have a drink, I have a drink, we're all having a good time. I constantly think of that Taylor Mack quote that goes, I want my audience to be drunk anywhere between 5 and 95% of the time. And that's still true. I want my audience to be drunk and having a good time, but I don't need to join them anymore, is what I've learned over the last year. Anyway, during this particular monologue, I had, for some reason, decided to drink rosé ciders, which are just standard cider, but bright pink, because there's no time like Pride to drink a cider that just screams fag. And I drank 4 of these ciders over the course of a 1-hour monologue, and by the end of the show I had to piss like I was Seabiscuit after being waterboarded. Anyway, so that first night of the show, Pride Friday, I got drunk with my friend, one of my best friends, and words were exchanged after I reached the tipping point from being okay into blackout. The next day I woke up unsure how I got home and all that, and it felt shitty. And I made it through to the show that next night when I received a text from that same friend from the previous night telling me I had said some pretty cruel things, and that she needed time and space away from me, and that we should not talk anymore, and asked me not to contact her. So I obliged, and I clocked it. I clocked that my drinking had hurt a friend, and that a friend was hurt enough to tell me what I'd done, even in the vaguest of terms. Pride Saturday, I did the show again, and I decided to keep myself much more under control during the show that night, and I did. I didn't drink as much in such a short time. So instead of pounding them back and heading home by 11 that night with friends, I drank less over a longer time, and we were out until 6 a.m. We went from drinking at the theater to drinking at Blockheads, and then from Blockheads to Deacon Brody's, and then from Deacon Brody's back to the theater, where I had a few bottles of wine that I was keeping in the fridge if I needed to swing by for a roadie after the march and the subsequent after parties the next day. We drank wine in the lobby of the theater until we went home. This night went off a hitch, and I had a lot of fun, even though there was the little snag from the night before, the little text sitting there in the back of my head. Pride Sunday was a disaster. Another of my best friends and I went to a bar along the parade route. He was hired to work this event in drag. This event had, yes, an open bar. And I got messy quick, and I was making out with boys, making out with the boy my best friend was interested in, and I saw friends, and I gave them hugs, and I was thrilled to be there. And honestly, until the end of the night, I was having a great time all day. And eventually, we made our way to some rooftop on 5th Avenue, I think, where I drank more and made an ass of myself and drunk talked to drunk strangers, and someone took the handkerchief off from around my neck, and they said they were going to keep that. And I was drinking nonstop, buying drinks for friends nonstop, making out with this boy, screaming, yelling, sucking all of the air off of this rooftop. And then my best friend and I got in a fight over the boy, and over my drinking, and over my behavior with his friends. And at the end of the fight, he said quietly, slowly, methodically, he said, "Maybe after tonight, we shouldn't talk for a while." A sentence I heard as clear as day, and that I don't think I'll ever forget as long as I live. Midnight on July 1st, 2019. Maybe after tonight, we shouldn't talk for a while. And it was right then that I knew I would wake up in the morning and I would never take another drink. Never take another drink. I left the bar that night pretty mad at my friend. I took the subway home pretty mad at the friend over the fight, and I woke up the next morning and I remembered and I realized that the fourth bender was my final one. Cool. Now that that's out of the way. On July 1st, 2019, I began my sobriety from alcohol. I first had to assert it to myself and define it for myself, and I asked sober friends for advice. I made it clear to them that I had a drinking problem, that I seriously needed help quitting, and they helped me. They gave me all sorts of advice that I tried all sorts of ways, and I asked friends what sobriety means to them, and I decided I was just going to be sober from alcohol for a while. I would still smoke weed, and I defined, and I still do define sobriety as seriously refraining, seriously abstaining from the stuff that completely fucks you. It was a necessary choice for me, and it needed to happen. And the first week wasn't as awful as I expected. It was a lot of just physical recovery from the last 2 benders and from Pride, and a lot of seltzer and a lot of ice cream, and checking in with friends, telling them how I was doing, proud that I had made it a week and then 2 weeks. And during those first 2 weeks, I had to figure out how I would order seltzers at drag shows and not seem like a buzzkill. And I had to figure out how I would explain it to friends who I didn't text to alert them I had quit drinking because my alcohol consumption had gotten out of control, because I didn't know. I didn't know if I was an alcoholic, and whether or not I couldn't decide in my head is because I didn't want to be lumped in with alcoholics far deeper in the drink than I was, or because I didn't want to be defined as an alcoholic, define myself as an alcoholic for the rest of my life. I'm not sure. I didn't wake up every morning and desperately need a drink, which is how my dad would define it during earlier attempts to get myself under control. The way my drinking problem manifested itself was once I started on a given day, I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop consuming. I couldn't stop spending. I couldn't stop giving my money to the system that was taking from me in so many ways. In the months leading up to my quitting, I never used the term alcoholic to describe myself. I never said I'm an alcoholic. I said I just like to have fun. I never said I'm an alcoholic. I said I just like to drink. I never said I'm an alcoholic. I said it makes me shake my ass better on the dance floor. I never said I'm an alcoholic. I said it makes me better in bed. It makes me go harder in bed. I never said I'm an alcoholic. I said it makes me sleep better. It puts me to sleep. In reality, I have since learned that it does none of those things. And when I quit drinking, I tried it on for a little bit, that title. And it always felt like a t-shirt that's a little too small, a little too tight in the armpits, always riding up and showing pit stains. It never felt right for me to call myself that, so I don't call myself an alcoholic. I say I don't drink anymore. And if I'm pressed by friends or family members or strangers about it, I say, oh, just got to the point where it was a problem and I had to stop. And that tends to be enough for folks, enough explanation. It tends to get the point across. During that show I was in last February, I started riding at SoulCycle. One of my castmates worked at the studio, and she got me on the SoulCycle train, got me in for free, and then her manager left the studio to go to another one, and that manager liked me, so I would ride there for free. Anyway, when I was drinking, I was still a drinker. I would sweat the toxins out, or whatever that means. Whatever that means, that's how I told myself I was keeping myself healthy. I would say, it's okay that I drank so much last night because I'm just going to burn all these calories off while riding this bike in the dark. At first it was a tool to reset myself by day so I could keep destroying myself by night, but when I quit drinking it became my method. But when I quit drinking it became a method by which I kept myself alive. Because quitting booze eventually did get unbelievably hard. There was a period of about 2 or 3 weeks after that first recovery week where I thought I was going to have a mental breakdown every single day. But I gotta get through it, I told myself. Gotta get through it, my sober friends told me. And one day I was taking a ride at this new studio on the west side, and this new studio had lights that responded to the music, like a light show. And this was my first ride at the new studio, and it was my first ride as a non-drinker. And I've written about before in so many of my other plays how fitness is a meditative practice for me, and about how, as much as it is about my physical health, it's also about my mental health. And about 35 minutes into class, after the arms section, there is always a song where the instructor stops talking and you just ride to whatever beat you want, and the lights are usually dim, and the addition of the responsive lights made things very emotional for me. It was already an emotional ride, but to add light design took things up a notch. And on July 10th, 2019, during the 5:30 ride, the song that came on after the arms section in the darkened room was Spirit by Beyonce from the live-action remake of The Lion King. And I had never heard this song before, and listening to the song in the dark room with the lights gently pulsing red, my instructor, she said one sentence during the song, and she said, "It's never the wrong choice to get yourself back on the path you're supposed to be on." Another sentence I'll never forget as long as I live. And I cry a lot, so I took the opportunity. I broke down on the bike. I just started to sob. No one could hear me or see me because the music was loud and the room was dark, so I just let myself cry and cry and cry for a few minutes. Before class ended, my teacher told us that we have everything we need to get to where we need to be. And I believed her. I believed in myself, and she became a friend, and she believes in me. I heard what she had to say that day, and I took it all so deeply to heart. And it took 10 days, took until that class, to really believe that I could make it in life without drinking, which I had previously thought was saving me, comforting me, holding me, but it was really killing me, choking me, holding me back. That's the end of my time. That's the end of my time drinking. That's what I know about my time as a person who needed alcohol to get by. And this is what I know about the folks around me. This is what I know about them, and this is what I know happened when I told them I wasn't going to be drinking anymore. My dad didn't quite believe me at first, I don't think. I don't think he thought I was serious about it. He knew that I'd tried before. I tried to quit a few times, tried to pull back my drinking a few times. It never worked. It never stuck. But this time around, I had to prove to everyone around me that I meant it. And the only way to prove I meant it was to fucking do it. To not drink anymore. To not rack up credit card charges at the bars. About a month in, when things were settling down, when hazy things were clarifying into the way things would be for the foreseeable, drinking-wise, I mean, non-drinking-wise, when the dust of that initial hump had settled, I got lunch with my dad one afternoon I had free. And during that lunch, he asked me if I was still doing the no-drinking thing. It was a gut punch. Still doing the no-drinking thing. And I got upset with him at this pizza place in the financial district. I didn't yell or cry. I just told him he has to be more supportive of me through this whole ordeal. I had asked him for help in the past. I had asked for help from family and friends and coworkers in the past, and no one had been willing to give that help because they didn't believe I could do it. And when I finally bucked the fuck up and gave myself the help I deserved, there were still constantly raised eyebrows, constant glances over sunglasses as if to say, "You're really quitting drinking? Are you sure about that?" This is what I know about my 21st birthday. My first legal drink at midnight on my 21st birthday was a Corona on my couch. I had come home from college a week early for Thanksgiving and rang in 21 with a Corona with no lime on the couch in the den. The next night, we went to my favorite restaurant in town, and my first legal drink ordered out was a Southern Comfort Old Fashioned, which is disgusting. I drank with my parents heavily all night until midnight, hard stop, because the next morning, I was getting surgery. That was why I had come home a week early. I was getting a bilateral inguinal hernia repaired before I went abroad the next semester, and I drank so much that the next morning after the surgery went smoothly, after the surgery, I was unable to pee for 14 hours. The anesthesia had dehydrated me on top of all the alcohol from the night before, and the one thing you have to do after hernia surgery in order to be permitted to leave the hospital is pee. All you had to do is pee, and I couldn't do it because I drunk to excess. But it was okay, right? It was okay because it was my 21st birthday. I finally peed when the doctor came in and said they were going to potentially have to catheterize me to get me to pee. And he described the process, and I went to the bathroom and I peed on my own, of my own volition, immediately afterwards. About 2 months after I quit drinking, 2 months after I quit drinking, my cousin got married. And I accidentally ordered a real drink at the reception. I had been ordering from the same bartender all night. Seltzer with a splash of cran, seltzer with a splash of cran, seltzer with a splash of cran. And later in the evening I said vodka soda with a splash of cran, and the bartender looked at me and he said, "I'm not serving you that." And I asked him what the hell he was talking about. And he said, "I'm not serving you a vodka soda when you've been drinking seltzer all night." And I was like, he said something about that wouldn't be right to him. And I said, "What are you talking about, my dude?" And he told me I had just ordered a vodka soda. I had completely bypassed my own awareness and ordered a real drink by rote. My heart rate soared. And I thanked this guy, this kind stranger, telling him I was brand new on the wagon. He told me he had a feeling it might have been something like that. This is what I know about my family, about how my family has reacted to me no longer drinking. There are probably some people in my family who don't believe I'm doing it, who don't believe I'll make it long once I hit a year, now that I've hit a year. And maybe I won't. I have no plans to start drinking as of the writing and of initial performance of this play, but I have no idea. Things change, mistakes are made, slip-ups happen. But at a few family holidays I've been to where I've been conspicuously drinking seltzer, there have been those withering, raised eyebrows, glances over glasses as if to say, "No, is there really any gin in there? No, there's really no gin in here. Or vodka. Or tequila." But for the most part, when all is said and done, my experience when I have told family members I've quit drinking, I've been met with silence. Nods of approval, nods of acceptance, nods of support. Not much said beyond I had to stop drinking, because they'd all seen me at parties and events and holidays and celebrations having had a few too many beers, a few too many glasses of wine, getting just a little too loud, a little too rowdy, saying the wrong thing at the wrong time, airing the opinion I would have been better off keeping to myself, making the joke that sounded funnier in my head than it did out loud. Nods in silence because they too knew it was the right decision for me to have made. Nods in silence because my aunts saw the same struggle to quit in my grandpa, who was in recovery from the time he was 37 on, that they were now seeing in me. And they cautiously support me in this endeavor, at least I hope they do. But who knows what they say behind closed doors. All families gossip behind closed doors. My friends were an entirely different story. My friends are my chosen family because we, as gay people, get to choose our family and all that jazz. And as I said, those last 6 months were rough, but it was probably the final year of it that was the darkest, that did the most damage, that was where I hurt the most people. And I've designated my friends into a few categories, without judgment, and with as much understanding as I can muster. There were times where I wasn't a good person because of my addiction to alcohol. There were times I said things I would have never said sober. There were times where too many beers made me a mean person. There were times that served as points of no return. There were times where it was clear I had a problem. And so I've categorized my friends into those who left and those who stayed and those who helped. This is what I know about those who left. Those who left couldn't hack it. And again, I say this without judgment. They decided they'd had enough, and I don't blame them. I was an ingrate, I was selfish, I was rude. I never picked up the check at the end of the night, or I'd ask if I could Venmo later that week. I was a bad friend, I was an asshole, I was conceited. I would talk about myself for hours without ever thinking to ask how they were, how their families were, how their siblings were, if I could remember their names. And when I did remember, it was baseless, I didn't care, or I felt obligated to ask, or I was looking at my phone while I spoke. I was not a good friend after a certain point in the night, and after a certain number of nights in a row, reaching that certain point, the texts inviting me out slowed. The "what are you up to this weekend" came to a standstill. I saw that a friend was in town once on Instagram. This was maybe between the first and second of the final 4 benders. I texted him, "Hey, let me know what you're doing tonight. I'd love to see you." No response. But knowing that he also loved 9th Avenue Saloon, I stopped by after work to see if he was there. And he was, with a couple of his other friends. And when I sat down with them, I clocked it. I said, they don't want to see me. I thought to myself, I'm not supposed to be here. But I stayed for a drink anyway. I stayed for a few drinks anyway. A few months into my voyage on the wagon, I texted another friend, a friend with whom I would regularly get hammered, a wealthy friend who would always pick up the check because he could afford to, and would always insist on picking up the check and if I ever offered. I realized I hadn't heard from him in a while, and I said, "Hey, I miss you, how are you?" And he sent back just like a screed, unlike anything I'd ever received, really ripping apart my character for behaviors performed when drunk, and performed as a result of sobering up from being drunk the next morning. He really, really went all in on me as if I were still doing these things, all of the stuff I mentioned earlier, as if I weren't working through them, as if I hadn't been sick at the end of my time as a drinker, as if I wasn't working on it, as if I was ready that early in my process to hear like how badly I'd fucked up. And this was really rough, like 800 or 900 words, just like going off, like go off, sis, get out what you need to get out. Clearly this was building up, and he ended the text with, "For me, at this point, our friendship is over." And that hurt. Hurt more than the rest of the attack, but I let it go, because my plea to stay friends, my plea, I quit drinking, I promise, was met with a brutal, "Yeah, okay." Months later, I got a text from another friend asking why that friend had unfollowed and unfriended us all on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, and I said, I have no idea. I wish him the best, and I hope he's okay. There's that line in Company, there's a time to come to New York and a time to leave, and maybe that's sometimes the way it is with friends. Not all friendships are boundless. Once you've given all you have the capacity to give to a certain person, you move on. And in this case, I probably pushed him to move on, and that's okay too. It wasn't fair of me to ask him, to ask anyone to stick around in the depths of my illness like that. I don't judge him for leaving. But I do take umbrage with the way things were left. And then there are those who stayed, and this is what I know about them. These are the friends who I fucked up with over and over and over the years, and these are the people who I've constantly forced to redefine the relationship because of my fuck-ups, whether they were related to drinking or not. These are the people in my life who have been able to see that I am trying to become better, trying to transcend the past and move on from it with responsibility and without excuses. The friend with whom I got in that fight, I don't remember, on Pride Friday, for example, she's a friend who stayed. 2 months into this whole thing, I texted her, I said, "I've been doing this for 2 months." She got back to me right away, and she said she was so proud and so excited. And I don't know if I said it during that conversation or any of the early conversations when we were getting back into each other's lives. I don't think I said, "I'm not ready yet," to hear what I said that night. I don't think I said that. I don't think I said, "I don't know when I'll be ready to hear what I said that night." But I think she understood, or at least I hope she did, and knows that I will want to know eventually, because our friendship can't grow without that difficult conversation, and I think it's fear holding me back from wanting to have that conversation, because no one's ever told me besides her, of course, that I became a cruel person when I reached a certain threshold of liquor in my blood. I think I'm afraid to find out what the addict Mr. Hyde in me had to say. I'll want to know eventually, but I'm not there yet. But I hope she knows and she'll want to stay after that conversation. And then there are those who helped. And what I know they knew when I told them. Those who got the text I sent last July 1st. The ones who got the text where I said, I think I need to quit drinking for real this time, for real. It's reached a breaking point and I think I need to stop this weekend being Pride weekend, made it clear that it's time, that enough is enough. The ones who got that text, that series of texts, they knew I meant it this time. And they said, okay, how can I help? And they stayed helping. Two of my best friends, one of whom I got in that final maybe after tonight, we shouldn't talk for a while, fight on Pride Sunday before waking up to a brand new day and a brand new chapter without the foggy glasses of my alcohol abuse, or at least without the plan to put them back on, and one of whom is my closest collaborator and sister who has seen me over the course of our friendship through my highest highs and my lowest lows. Both of them responded, okay, how can I help? And they didn't question if I meant it. They didn't make me feel shame for quitting. They saw me in my struggle and didn't need to figure out if I meant it. Those who helped keep me under control, who helped me control myself, encouraged me in those first few weeks to drink all the seltzer I needed, encouraged me to eat, and even brought me all the ice cream I needed, felt I needed to keep myself from drinking. Those who helped saw me those first few weeks rolling up to the Soul Cycle studio looking like I'd been through hell and back, because those first few weeks were hell. Saw me roll up to the studio, take one class, come out, and then go right back in for the next. Those who helped me saw how I dove into anything to keep myself from drinking, from putting myself into situations where I would end up drinking. They saw me take more cycling classes than I've ever taken. They saw me run more miles than ever. They saw me writing nonstop. They saw me doing the work, cheered me on, sent me texts of support, gave me hugs. Those who helped were there when I asked them to be. They were there when a few weeks in when I said, I want to go to a drag show. They were there when I sent that text and texted back, are you sure? And when I texted back, yes, they said, I said yes, and when I texted back and said, yes, I'm sure, they said, okay, what time and where? And they showed up. And they sat with me as I inhaled fries and seltzer and laughed alongside me as the drag queens did their thing, sitting at one of the low tables at therapy or lurking in the back at hardware or on one of those awful, god-awful side couches at industry. And I wasn't able to go back to 9th Avenue Saloon for a long time. 5 months. Feels like an eternity. An eternity of walking up 9th Avenue and not even acknowledging the bouncers who knew me as a regular, who knew me as a guy who shut the place down so many nights there towards the end. An eternity of walking past until the night before my 27th birthday. I had a performance that night, and I said to my friends on the bill and in the audience, come on, we're going to go to 9th Avenue Saloon to ring in my birthday. And the bartenders welcomed me back, clearly not sure if I was the same Mary from 6 months back. And when I ordered seltzer after seltzer, one of the bartenders asked me if I had quit. And I said, yeah. And he smiled and poured me my seltzer and handed me a basket of popcorn. Of course, the popcorn would have been free either way, but the gesture was meaningful. It said to me, he said, I believe in you. I think you can do this. Maybe I read too much into it because I'm gay and I love theater. Maybe it was just here's popcorn. But I love the drama, so I read into it. Anyway, that night, we didn't even make it to midnight to ring in my birthday at the bar because my friends got drunk and started arguing about queer young adult novels. And I said, I've had enough! And I rang in my birthday stuck on the Uptown A at 59th Street. What a blessing. And every Christmas, I've lived in my current apartment, I've thrown what I call the extravagant Christmas gala. I love the holidays, and every year I decorate the apartment rather beautifully, I must say. Lots of fake trees, lots of lights, lots of streamers, lots of balloons, all that good shit. And we throw a party that goes until the wee hours of the morning. The first year was in the middle of a snowstorm. All Dave's folks were texting me to cancel. Oh, I'm so sorry. The weather, I can't come uptown. And in the end, I had all this alcohol, and only 2 friends showed up from a block away. No one came besides them. I probably got too drunk and don't remember, but chances are I did. And the second year was a hoot and a half. I did all these costume changes. I start the evening every year dressed as Mrs. Claus. Because a few years ago, I spent like $475 on a Mrs. Claus gown. The most expensive item of clothing I've ever bought myself, and I wear it once a year for this party. I didn't buy the dress for the party. I bought the dress for a show, but then the party started happening. I was like, all right, I guess somebody else will wear it. But anyway, the second extravagant Christmas gala was a hit and a half, drunk boys and drunk girls, and everyone's under the mistletoe, and I did a bunch of costume changes, and eventually into my pajamas because I was drunk and wanted to be cozy. And then the party went on until I want to say 4 a.m. The final guests left. We had fun. And this past December, my third annual, first sober, extravagant Christmas gala, I was so nervous. How do you throw a party if you're not getting drunk? How do you host if you can't wander from group to group at ease, made easy by liquor? How do you hold the attention of friends after they've had a certain number of drinks? And the answer is with greater ease than you would have should you have been drinking. Who knew? You can focus more deeply on your friends rather than on the next conversation. You can tell a story without getting sidetracked. You can take care of a friend who showed up at your party, the first party you're throwing as a person who doesn't drink anymore, who showed up to your party blasted halfway from here on Mars and navigate getting him out and home safely without getting mad. You become a compassionate, caring party host without the cocktails, and you make the party about your friends instead of about yourself. And your friends and family are the point of the party anyway, right? And the party went until 4 or 5 a.m. or so, I want to say. One of the roomies had a friend over who just kept sitting on the couch and talking. And I was fully in pajamas at that point. I'd spent the day preparing for the party and setting the house up. Was spent and cozy and enjoying the rest of the night. Those who helped me stay sober that night. Helped me keep myself together. The next morning, this is the morning after Pride Sunday now, forgive the time jumps, forgive the sloppy narrative form here, or at least that's my excuse. We're playing with narrative form. Even though I said this is about responsibility and not excuses, I have to make an excuse for what might be shoddy form here in this play. But in a year, my brain has been all over the place. Maybe the play can be too, right? My friend, the next morning, the morning after Pride Sunday, my friend texted me, the friend with whom I had gotten in that fight, the all-out end of friendship fight on the rooftop the night before, or maybe I texted him, I'm not sure. But it was basically, I love you, back and forth a few times, followed by an apology tour from both of us, mostly me apologizing for all of the drinking and all of the yelling and all of the misbehavior. And then I brought up the topic of the day. I brought up quitting drinking. I brought it up with him before, how I felt out of control, how much I wanted to get it under control, but I just couldn't. About 2 weeks ago, I was on a bike ride with a friend of mine in the Palisades, and we rode our bikes over the George Washington Bridge into the state park. And while I am an adrenaline junkie to a certain extent, I am also extremely anal retentive and like to be in control and am afraid of everything. So flying down a half-mile-long hill at increasing velocity was terrifying and enthralling, and I kept my hand on the brake almost the whole time, but there were a few moments where I just let go of the brake completely to see. And in those few moments, I was taken back to that same out-of-control feeling, back when I recognized I need help, back when I recognized I was in the grip of alcohol, and I recognized on that bike ride how far I'd come. And all I needed to do to get back under control was give the brake a little squeeze. And the world flying past me came back to a glorious natural pace as I careened north through the beautiful woods of beautiful New Jersey. And I feel fucking amazing. I do, a year later. I wake up every morning, and instead of wondering if I'm tired or hungover or both, I am able to accurately answer the question, how are you feeling today? And most days I feel fucking amazing. It's absolutely wild. I can't believe that I woke up most days with a hangover for almost 2.5 years, and I can't believe that I tricked myself into believing that waking up without one is an amazing feeling I so rarely deserved. Waking up every day without a hangover is even better, even more exciting. It's wonderful to wake up every day and look out at the blue sky and feel glad I get to see it as it is without squinting in pain from the bright morning hurting my eyes. On the days where it's hard to stay sober, and there have been a lot of those in the last couple of months, and we'll talk about those in a minute, I just have to remember what a gift it is to be here. It is a gift to wake up, crack my back, and be rid of any soreness from the night before, instead of needing to take Advil every few hours while gulping back coffee and water so that I might be back to even before the night begins anew. It is a gift to wake up and not desperately crave a hangover sandwich from the bodega. It is a gift to wake up and remember how I got home. And that's probably the biggest gift this whole thing has given me. Beyond, returning control of my life to the body I live in. The biggest gift is remembering how I got home. Even if it's hazy some mornings, because I was so exhausted after the drag show. Hazy because it was an uneventful, sleepy ride home. There's not a night that's gone by where I can't remember what happened. I am able to hold myself accountable for the account of my night. And at first, I counted my milestones by the day. 1 day without a beer, 2 days without a beer, 3 days without an Aperol Spritz, 18 days without a gin and tonic, and then it became 3 weeks without, a month without, 7 weeks without, and every fucking milestone, no matter how small or inconsequential, for some fucking reason, I remember 72 days hit really hard. Who the hell knows why? Every fucking milestone was worth celebrating. Every milestone is worth celebrating. Let me emphasize that. I feel a weird sense of accomplishment when my sobriety app notifies me at midnight, like, congratulations, you made it to 250 days. Like, okay, I didn't really do anything. I'm just sitting here watching Chopped. But then all of a sudden, it feels like I did do something. Because, you know, for 250 days, I could have been drinking. I could have been drowning in it. And I wonder how long that lasts. How long each milestone's arrival suddenly makes me feel like I've climbed a mountain and planted a flag at the summit as if to say I'm here. I wonder how long that lasts. I went to a few AA meetings early on, and while it ultimately wasn't for me, I did go to a meeting on my 90th day without a drink, commonly accepted as a huge milestone, and I cried when I accepted my chip, and I said a little something, and I felt very vulnerable, and for the first time in all of it, even with friends and family who had stayed to help and support me along the way, I felt, for the first time, alone at that meeting. And I cried a lot sitting in the back, and I received a lot of handshakes and hugs at the end of the meeting. And a big part of why I stopped going and had to find the way forward on my own is because, strangely, by coincidence, the first few meetings I tried out around town were all meetings where the person sharing, I think they call it qualifying, all of these meetings just ended up being about suicide and suicidal ideations. And I was like, Jesus Christ, if that's what this is going to be, I have to figure something else out here. So I stopped going, and I just powered through until the urge to have a drink every day went away. And I could live my life happily and comfortably. On Christmas, I usually have to work, and so does a friend who's now my roommate, so we meet up after my shift at one of the restaurants I work for, and we have a late-night Christmas dinner. In years past, the maitre d's I'm friends with would send over a few drinks on the house, and this year they brought over a round of champagne, and I said, oh, you know, I actually don't drink anymore. And this manager got a look on his face like I just called his mother an ugly cow, and that was the first and the only time I might add, I felt shamed for not wanting a drink. And I felt bad for not wanting the drink I did, because there are still moments. These moments vary in length from a second before I snap out of it to like a whole fucking day. There's still moments where all I want is a fucking margarita. Like, sometimes the breeze hits me just right. It's just like it's 5 o'clock somewhere, you know? Friends have been asking me recently if there's anything that I miss about drinking. And everything on my list of what I miss about drinking is a fucking margarita. There are margaritas around the city I would kill for sometimes. Even though one would kill me, one would undo a year of progress, a year of work, a year of success. The one thing I miss about drinking is a margarita before a Broadway show or at the end of a hot summer day with friends at some rooftop bar. There are, of course, drinks I've concocted that taste like a margarita, namely it's just a limeade with seltzer. And if I want to be a little naughty, I'll add a single dash of hot sauce to approximate something like a spicy margarita. Something like that. But yeah, a fucking margarita. And there have certainly been moments during, I know I said I wasn't going to talk about it at the beginning of the play, but during the pandemic, where I've wanted something to take the edge off, especially in the middle there, at the height of it. Living 8 blocks from a hospital during a pandemic, it got bleak for a while there, didn't it? But I didn't. And I ultimately realized I don't need it. Even when it gets hard and all I want to do is escape into a bottle of wine, we make it through. You make it through. You push through. I push through. I'm here. So that's the K in the K column of the chart. This is what I know about drinking. Don't worry, we go through the rest of the columns rather quickly here. Don't worry. And what I know about drinking is this. There is a difference between being a fool and making a fool of yourself. And I'd much rather inhabit the former than make those around me put up with the latter. The middle column of the chart is what I want to know. And what I want to know is, and I know I haven't spoken so much about it during this play, but it's intrinsic to who I am as a person, so maybe it's been there all along. But what I want to know is why gay men need alcohol to relate to one another, and why we can't just be ourselves. Why are we such shitheads to one another? Why do we need liquid courage to flirt, to laugh, to caress, to kiss, to connect, to talk? And are we so fucked up from our childhoods where we were told through microaggression after microaggression and macroaggression after macroaggression that we were not enough, that there was something wrong with the way we were, that we were to an extent unlovable unless we fit in within a very precise cookie cutter of what those around us who have oppressed us have deemed okay, that we drink to forget the trauma and find our way to a radical honesty? I think about pride this way a lot, the concept of gay pride, queer pride. I think about it a lot. I think about pride as a ritual of radical honesty. Pride as a concept is about being proud of who we are as queer folk, dancing in the street, marching in the street, streaming down the streets of New York, fighting for what's right, fighting for a better world, because we've fought for so long to say, this is who I am. What happens when we expand the notion of pride beyond just saying, this is who I am and who I am as gay? What if we expand the ritual of radical honesty, as I've tried to do here tonight, and said, you know, I'm gay and I struggle with the way I look in the mirror. I'm gay and I struggle with my belief in a higher power. I'm gay and I struggle with alcohol abuse. We as queer people open our arms and welcome our queer siblings in just because they're queer, but what about when we find they're even more kindred? Even more. We might find ourselves familiarly tied to one another. If we opened up more in this way, showed each other who we are when there's not an Instagram filter to make us look fuckable or a Facetune touch-up to make the acne from last week go away, maybe our relationship to one another, our relationships to one another wouldn't be so absolutely royally fucked if we were able to show ourselves each other without alcohol loosening the ties that bind bravery tightly around us and our memories so we might forget what's said in the morning. Maybe we would be better to one another. You know, for every shameful memory I've shared in this play, there are 20 more I could have shared in its place. And what I want to know is, how long will it take for me to let that shame go? And what I want to know is this. I have a scar above my left eyebrow from the stitches I mentioned before. I want to know how long it will take me to stop panicking when I remember that whole occasion, the theater party where I got so drunk, the cab that I took to Penn, the drunk drive home. I want to know how long it will take before I accept that the past is in the past, let it go. Could have ended so much worse than it did. The past is in the past. Deep breath in, deep breath out, let it go. I want to know how long before I stop feeling shitty about the shitty things I did. There's this idea that I like to comfort myself with every once in a while. I'll flash back to a memory that fills me with shame. And I calm myself down from the subsequent dread and anxiety by reminding myself that I'm the only person in the world who remembers it. I'm the only person who remembers something I said in 7th grade in exactly the way I'm remembering it, because I'm the only person who experienced it from my point of view. Chances are, if they remember it, whatever I said to them, if they remember it the way I remember it, they don't remember it at all. That's what I'm trying to do with some of my drinking memories. I have to remember I'm probably the only person who thinks about these things with the frequency and self-flagellation that I feel, and that others have wholly moved on. I have to sit with these feelings and the thoughts that make me feel shitty until they've done what they need to do, I guess. Teach me what I need to know, and then I can let them know. And what I know is this. What I want to know is this. Will my need for seltzer always be as voracious as it has been for the last year? I always want ice cream, but will the sudden cravings I sometimes get that I think I may have trained, or am at least starting to train my brain to have when I have one of those sudden urges to drink, will those sudden intense ice cream cravings ever subside? Will I ever need physical fitness? Will I ever not need physical fitness? Will I always need physical fitness as a meditative practice to maintain my sobriety? Will the friends I pushed away with the drink come back on their own, or do I have to go out and make it happen myself? And if I have to go out and make it happen myself, how? How do I make it happen? And what happens when I ask and they say thanks but no thanks? What happens if they air grievances I'm not ready to hear yet? What if I never get better from this? What if I never heal? Can I truly get better from this? Can I heal? Am I better? Am I doing better? Am I going to be better? Does better last? Can better last? Does better last? And will I ever stop wanting a fucking margarita? I like to end my rituals of sharing myself with a litany and an afterword. We'll do the litany first. The what I've learned column on that chart. A resource I wish I'd had when I was younger, if not in the 4th grade. The first time I was learning what I was supposed to think of the world, if not in the 4th grade, then maybe the first time I was offered that sweaty can of PBR and asked for something stronger instead. And if not when I asked for something stronger, then maybe when I was offered that first shot. And if not, then any of the times I realized I made a mistake because of alcohol. The first time I threw up, the first time I fought with a friend, the first time I ended a friendship, the first time I had a hangover, the first time I clocked I was out of control, the first time a drag queen offered me water instead of a shot. Anytime there was an opportunity for me to get myself under control, if only I could share with myself then what I would need to know later, what I needed to know a year ago, what I needed to know over my 10-year courtship with poison that only held me back. If only I could share with my former self what the completed K, W, and L chart looks like. In another play of mine, not dissimilar to the one you're watching now, I waxed poetic for 10,500 words about whether or not there's a God, and about what I had learned across my spiritual journey. I find it much harder to wax poetic about something so tangibly experienced in my body, and here we're nearly 13,000 words in, and I still feel like I could go on for hours and hours, but I won't, there's 2 pages left. So, what I've learned in my first year without alcohol. Quitting alcohol is the hardest thing I've ever done. It has been a wildly difficult year for all of us for a lot of reasons. So think about trying to get an addiction under control through all of this. I'm not saying I've had it worse than anyone. I'm just trying to put, my challenge into perspective here. There were days where I woke up in pain. There were days where I woke up completely panicked. There were days where I woke up poor because I'd had a craving for a huge Mexican meal I couldn't afford on that week's pay, but my friends who had been down this path told me to give in to my cravings. Give in if it meant I wouldn't have a drink that night. There were days I woke up as happy as I could be for whatever reason. I'd seen a spectacular play the night before, or I was hydrated, or I gotten a good night of sleep, and then fucking boom. I'm brushing my teeth, getting ready for work, and then all of a sudden it washes over me. I remember I'll never be drunk and shaking my ass on the dance floor again if I can help it. And I get sad. And then I remember I am so much better for this. That bike ride I went on a few weeks ago in the Palisades, 18 miles of hills and valley, that was the second hardest thing I've ever done to myself physically. The third hardest thing I've ever done to myself was I accidentally ran a half marathon once just because I had the energy and time with no preparation, and this was before I'd quit drinking. I was on a run and I just kept going. Big mistake. The fourth hardest thing, a few weeks after I cried on the bike to Beyonce in the Dark Soul Cycle studio, we did a class that was almost entirely sprints on the bike with the same teacher, and I don't think I'd ever cried while working out because of how hard the class was until then. But I know that quitting alcohol is the hardest thing I've done this little life so far. Maybe it won't be the hardest in my life, my entire life, but in my 27 years, yeah. It's the hardest. My writing has gotten better and clearer since I cleared my mind. I learned that in my first year without alcohol. I don't have to go to a sex party if I'm not in the mood to go to a sex party. I learned that in my first year without alcohol. I don't have to go on a date with a guy if I'm not interested. I learned that in my first year without alcohol. I don't have that much more money to spend just because I stopped spending it on booze. I learned that in my first year without alcohol. I was spending rent and food money on alcohol. I was spending irresponsibly. I learned that in my first year without alcohol. Not everyone will believe you. I learned that in my first year without alcohol. And I don't need anyone in my life who doesn't believe me. I learned that in my first year without alcohol. I don't need anyone in my life who doesn't believe in me. I learned that in my first year without alcohol. I love grapefruit seltzer and hate pomegranate seltzer. I learned that in my first year without alcohol, but not as much as black cherry seltzer. And I learned that in my first year without alcohol. And mandarin orange seltzer will do, sometimes, in a pinch. I learned that in my first year without alcohol. Almost none of the limited edition Ben & Jerry's flavors are worth it. I learned that in my first year without alcohol. The couch I passed out on every night is a terrible spot to sleep, drunk or sober. I learned that in my first year without alcohol. I learned I don't need to drink, not before dinner, not after dinner, not before bed, not sneakily on the job. I learned I don't need to drink to have a good time or to shake my ass at Stonewall. I am just as much fun, if not more fun, without alcohol buzzing through my veins. I learned that in my first year without alcohol. And maybe you think you can do it alone. Maybe you think you can do it alone, but you can't. You can't make it from there to here without some help. I learned that in my first year without alcohol. I'm trying to let go of the guilt and the shame I feel. My journey to quitting drinking was a series of clocks. Clocking this sin committed, clocking that behavior of mine, clocking that behavior, clocking that reaction from a friend or a stranger. All of these clocks resulting in shame I didn't want to acknowledge or work through. All of these clocks forcing me to reckon with how much longer I could keep it up before my world imploded. I learned that in my first year without alcohol. I wish I could take the chart down off the wall, completed chart, and roll it up with a little ribbon and give it to myself 10 years ago and say, open this when you need it. Open this when you're having a hard time. Open this. I wonder when I would have opened it. Nope, wrong one. Wrong one. There we go. I'll end the evening with a small afterword. The one good thing that came out of the darkness beyond me finding the light. The one thing I am not ashamed of in that final bender on that final night. The final night as a drinker. There on that rooftop in Midtown, blasted beyond recognition of myself, wrapped in a red fleece blanket they had in bins for when it got chilly later in the evening. My friend and I started talking to this handsome guy and his friend. We're flirting, it's pride, we're having a good time, and I'm drunk. And I tell the fella I'm a playwright, my friend is a filmmaker and drag queen, we're talking about that. And I say to the guy, what about you? What is it that you do? And he says, no, I don't want to talk about that. And he continues his line of questioning about us, asking us what we do, what kind of work we make. And my drunk ass says, no, I want to know what you do. And he hesitates before bashfully saying, he says, I'm in law enforcement. And I start yelling, you're a fucking cop? You're a fucking cop? Are you fucking kidding me? You're a fucking cop and you're fucking out on Pride? Oh, fuck you. Come on, let's get out of here. And then I stormed out. I stormed right out of that rooftop bar. I stormed right off that roof, stormed to the elevator, left that rooftop bar, and then we left. So if there's one thing in me that's remained the same, drunk or sober, I still fucking hate cops, and cops don't belong at Pride. Good night, everyone. Thank you. All right, that's all I got, guys. Bye. Thanks.